I never used to leave work early. I was the kind of man who stayed late, double-checked emails, reviewed reports until the cleaning crew turned off the lights. But that Thursday, something pulled me. Maybe it was exhaustion, or maybe it was something deeper, a sense I couldn't quite name. I just knew I needed to be somewhere else. I needed to be with my daughter. Sophie was 10, bright-eyed, thoughtful, with a quiet way of observing the world. Piano had become her outlet, her joy. Every Tuesday and Thursday, she had her lesson at a modest music academy near our home in Somerville, just outside Boston. Her instructor was Daniel Reed, a man in his late 30s with a soft voice and a calm demeanor. I'd only spoken to him a few times, mostly just nods and polite hellos. It never crossed my mind to think much more about him. That day I left the office just after 4 p.m. It felt strange, almost rebellious. I imagined Sophie's face lighting up when she saw me picking her up early. Maybe we'd stop for frozen yogurt on the way home. Maybe I'd ask her to play me something new she learned. The little things, the things I thought I had more time for. I parked across the street from the music school, a red brick building with wide glass windows and ivy creeping up the sides. I got out of the car and made my way around the side, toward the back entrance where parents often waited for their kids. That's when I saw them. Emily, my wife, was standing against the wall just near the dumpster and the old fire escape. She was dressed casually, jeans, a light jacket. Her posture was relaxed, too relaxed. Daniel stood close, just inches from her. His hand brushed her cheek, and before I could blink, they kissed. Not a quick kiss, not a peck. It was slow, intentional, intimate. My breath caught in my chest. I froze. My feet didn't move. My mind didn't move. I watched them, my wife and this man, sharing something that wasn't meant for anyone else to see. Her hands rested on his chest. His arms gently held her waist. They kissed like people who forgot the world existed. I didn't know what to feel first. Anger? Betrayal? Shock? My mind struggled to make sense of what my eyes were seeing. My Emily, the woman I shared my life with, the mother of our daughter, standing there like a stranger. I wanted to shout, to run, to confront, but I stood there invisible, like a ghost watching his own life slip away. Then the door opened. Sophie stepped out, holding Emily's hand. Her eyes lit up when she saw me. "Daddy!" she called, running toward me, her backpack bouncing behind her. Emily froze for a split second. Her eyes met mine, a flicker of panic, maybe guilt. She opened her mouth, but no words came. I bent down, scooping Sophie into my arms, her small body grounding me. "Hey, kiddo," I said, forcing a smile. "How was class?" And just like that, the moment was gone. But something had shattered inside me, and I didn't know if it could ever be whole again. The ride home was a quiet one. Sophie chatted about her lesson, how she finally nailed that tricky section of Für Elise, how Mr. Reed said she had excellent finger discipline. Every mention of his name felt like a hot needle in my chest. Emily sat in the passenger seat staring out the window. I could feel her glancing at me from time to time, but I didn't look at her. My hands gripped the steering wheel harder than necessary, my knuckles pale. The air between us wasn't just tense, it was poisoned. When we pulled into the driveway, Sophie bounded inside, humming a melody she'd picked up in class. I turned off the engine, letting the silence settle for a few seconds before Emily spoke. "I didn't mean for that to happen," she said quietly, barely audible. I looked at her for the first time since the kiss. Her eyes were full of something. Regret, maybe, or fear. I couldn't tell. "How long?" I asked. She blinked, caught off guard. "It's not what you think," I interrupted. "Don't lie, Emily. Please, just tell me the truth." There was a long pause. Then she whispered, "A few weeks. A few weeks." The words echoed like a gunshot. It was almost laughable, how short the time frame was compared to the depth of the betrayal. But it didn't feel new. It felt old, heavy, like something that had been growing behind my back in the cracks of our routines. "Does Sophie know?" I asked. "No," she said quickly. "God, no, I would never." "You already have," I said, my voice flat. I got out of the car, not waiting for more explanations. I walked into the house past Sophie, who was laying out her piano books on the living room floor, past the kitchen where Emily had once made us pancakes on Sunday mornings. I went upstairs into the guest room and closed the door. That night I didn't sleep. I lay on the stiff mattress staring at the ceiling, listening to every creak of the old house. I could hear Emily moving around downstairs, the occasional clink of a glass in the sink, the hush of the fridge opening and closing. I thought about everything. The years we spent building this life, the way she used to reach for my hand in the dark, the sound of her laugh when Sophie made a joke. And then I thought about that kiss, the way her hand held his face, the way her body leaned into his. The next morning, Sophie woke me up, cheerful as ever. "Daddy, are you coming to my recital next week?" I smiled and nodded. "Of course, baby." And then I realized the horror. Daniel would be there, standing in front of a room full of parents and children, conducting and clapping and handing out certificates. And Emily, where would she be, sitting next to me? Smiling like nothing happened? I had no plan, no answers, just a heart that felt like it had been cracked in two. The days that followed blurred into a haze of silent mornings and mechanical nights. Emily and I moved around each other like ghosts, speaking only when Sophie was present, pretending for her sake. But every conversation was laced with tension, every glance a battlefield of unspoken words. I watched her more closely now. How she checked her phone when she thought I wasn't looking. How she lingered in the hallway after Sophie went to bed, staring at nothing. I tried to remember the last time we had touched, without it feeling obligatory. I couldn't. One evening after Sophie was asleep, I found Emily in the kitchen, sipping tea at the counter. Her eyes looked tired, hollow. I stood there for a long moment, unsure why I had come downstairs at all. "We should talk," she said before I could speak. I nodded and sat down across from her. "I didn't plan this," she began. "I didn't go looking for it. It just happened." "That's what people say when they want to excuse something they chose," I replied, my voice low. "No one accidentally falls into someone else's arms." She looked away, biting her lip. "I was lonely, Michael," she said finally. "You work so much. You're always tired. We stopped being us." I wanted to scream, to tell her that I was tired because I was carrying the weight of everything, the bills, the house, the future. I wanted to remind her of the nights I stayed up with Sophie when she had the flu, of the time I fixed the roof myself because we couldn't afford repairs. But I didn't say any of that. I just asked, "Do you love him?" The silence that followed was more painful than anything she could have said. "I don't know," she whispered. That broke me. I got up and walked out. I didn't slam the door. I didn't shout. I just needed to breathe air that didn't feel like it was choking me. I walked through the neighborhood, past houses with warm lights glowing in the windows, past laughter and dinners and normalcy, things I no longer felt part of. When I returned, the lights were off. Emily had gone to bed. I stood in Sophie's doorway for a moment, watching her sleep. Her little hand clutched the stuffed panda I'd given her for her 6th birthday. She looked peaceful, untouched by any of this, but she would be, eventually. The truth had a way of slipping through the cracks. Back in the guest room, I stared at the ceiling again. This time, the silence wasn't empty. It was loud with questions I wasn't ready to face. Was our marriage already over? Was I strong enough to stay? Could I ever forgive her? And more terrifying than all of that, could I survive if I didn't? I didn't tell anyone. Not my brother, not my closest friend from college. I told myself I was protecting Emily, or Sophie, or maybe even myself. But the truth was simpler. I was ashamed. Ashamed that I hadn't noticed. Ashamed that I was still under the same roof with her. Ashamed that part of me still wanted to believe this was fixable. At work, I buried myself in projects. People noticed I was quieter, more withdrawn, but no one asked. That was the thing about pain. If you wore it properly, people just assumed you were tired. And I was tired, in every way. At home, Emily and I coexisted. There was a night when we sat on opposite sides of the couch while Sophie played us a new song she'd learned. Her fingers were still uncertain on the keys, stumbling here and there, but she looked so proud. I clapped, Emily smiled, and for a brief moment it almost felt normal. But it wasn't. That weekend I told Emily I needed some space. "Are you leaving?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I don't know," I said honestly. "But I can't keep pretending nothing happened." She nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "Where will you go?" "My brother's," I said, "just for a while." Telling Sophie was the hardest part. I sat her down in the living room, her favorite blanket wrapped around her like armor. "Hey," I said gently, "Daddy's going to stay at Uncle Ryan's for a little bit, okay?" Her face fell. "Why?" "Mommy and I need some time to think about things, grown-up things. But I'll still see you all the time, I promise." She didn't say anything, just nodded slowly and leaned into me. Her silence hurt more than any words could. At Ryan's place, the couch was lumpy and the fridge was always stocked with things I didn't eat, but there was quiet. Space. I found myself walking more, driving aimlessly at night, staring at old family photos on my phone. There was one of Emily and me from a trip to Maine years ago. Her head on my shoulder, both of us laughing at something I couldn't remember. I stared at that photo until my eyes burned. One night, I got a text from Emily. "Sophie keeps asking about you. She misses you." Then another. "I miss you too." I didn't respond. Instead, I sat there, phone in hand, thinking about all the ways love could twist itself, into longing, into betrayal, into something unrecognizable. And I wondered, for the first time, if forgiveness was even possible. Part 4 of 15 continue. Part 5. 2 weeks passed. Emily and I barely spoke except about Sophie. Every exchange was logistical. School pickup, recital dates, lunch preferences. It was sterile, transactional, but it was safer that way. One Saturday, I picked Sophie up for our weekend together. She clung to me like she hadn't in years. "Can we get pancakes?" she asked. We went to the diner near the park, the same place we used to go as a family. She ordered chocolate chip, extra syrup. I watched her eat, her legs swinging under the table, and then halfway through her plate she looked up. "Are you and Mommy getting divorced?" The question hit me like a punch. I put down my coffee cup slowly. "Why do you ask that?" She shrugged. "You don't live at home anymore, and Mommy cries sometimes when she thinks I'm asleep." My throat tightened. "I don't know what's going to happen yet," I said gently. "But what I do know is that your mom and I both love you more than anything." She stared at her plate for a moment, then whispered, "I wish you'd both just be happy again." I didn't have the heart to tell her that sometimes happiness and staying together weren't the same thing. That night, after I put her to bed at my brother's place, I sat in the dark with my phone in my hand. My thumb hovered over Emily's name for a long time before I finally texted her. "We need to talk. Just us." She replied almost instantly. "Okay. Tomorrow?" We met at a coffee shop a few blocks from the house, neutral territory. Emily looked tired, not just physically but in her bones. We sat at a corner table, far from anyone who might recognize us. "I can't keep living in limbo," I began, "and I don't think Sophie can either." Emily nodded slowly. "I agree." We talked for over an hour, not fighting, not accusing, just unraveling. We spoke about the affair, about the distance that came before it, about everything we ignored for years. "I'm not trying to justify what I did," she said. I felt invisible, like a roommate, like I was slowly disappearing." It stung, but I understood. Somewhere along the line, we both stopped trying. I asked her a question that had haunted me for weeks. "Do you want this marriage to survive?" She paused for a long time. Then, "I don't know. I want to try, but I don't know how." Neither did I, but hearing her say she wanted to try, that did something to me. It cracked the wall I'd built around my heart, even if just a little. I left the cafe not with answers, but with something that resembled hope. Hope is a strange thing. It doesn't come with guarantees. It's more like a flickering candle in a drafty room. It can go out at any second, but you still find yourself protecting it with everything you have. After our talk at the cafe, Emily and I agreed to go to counseling. It wasn't a dramatic decision. There were no tearful promises or romantic gestures, just a quiet, mutual understanding. If there was even a chance to fix what we'd broken, we owed it to ourselves, and especially to Sophie, to try. Our first session was awkward. We sat on opposite ends of the couch like two strangers summoned to identify the same wreckage. The therapist, a woman named Karen, asked us simple questions, but the answers were anything but. "When did you stop feeling seen by each other?" Emily answered first. "Years ago," she said. "Maybe after Sophie was born. Everything became about her, then about money, then about survival." I nodded. "We stopped checking in. I don't think we meant to. It just happened." Hearing ourselves say it out loud, how we'd drifted, how silence had replaced touch, it was sobering. It wasn't just the affair that broke us. It was 1,000 small cuts before that. After a few sessions, we started meeting at the house again, sometimes for dinner with Sophie, sometimes just to talk. It wasn't comfortable, not yet. But it was honest. There were still moments when I'd see Emily across the table and feel that flicker of anger, the image of her with Daniel replaying in my mind like a reflex. But then she'd look at Sophie, or she'd catch my gaze, and I'd remember that we were both trying to crawl out of the same hole. Then one evening, I saw Daniel again. It was at the recital. Sophie was nervous all week, practicing obsessively, rehearsing in the living room while I sat nearby with a fake clipboard, pretending to be a judge. The day of the performance, Emily and I sat side by side in the auditorium, pretending everything was normal. When Daniel walked onto the stage to introduce the students, I felt my entire body go rigid. He looked the same, calm, collected, well-dressed. But when his eyes scanned the audience and landed on us, something changed. His jaw tightened. He hesitated for half a second before continuing. After Sophie played her piece, beautifully I should add, I stood and clapped so hard my palms stung. She bowed shyly, her cheeks pink with pride. Later in the hallway, Daniel approached. "Michael," he said, nodding politely. I nodded back, tight-lipped. He glanced at Emily, then back at me. "I'm stepping down after this semester. Just wanted you to know." Emily's eyes widened slightly, but she said nothing. "Good," I said, keeping my voice even. He offered a half-hearted smile and walked away. It wasn't satisfying, it wasn't justice, but it was something. That night, Emily whispered to me as I tucked Sophie into bed, "I didn't ask him to quit." "I know," I said, "but I'm glad he is." There was a pause, then she said, "Thank you for coming today. It meant the world to her." It meant the world to me, too. I didn't know what came next, but I knew we were no longer standing in the same darkness. It's strange how healing doesn't look like what you expect. I thought forgiveness would come with some big emotional wave, a release, a breakthrough, something cinematic. But it didn't. Instead, it came in fragments, a conversation that didn't end in defensiveness, a shared memory that didn't feel tainted, a laugh, short, hesitant, but real. Emily and I kept going to therapy. Some weeks I dreaded it, other weeks I craved it. There were days I thought we were making progress, and others where I questioned why I was still trying. But one thing became clear. She wasn't the only one who had drifted. I had too, maybe not into someone else's arms, but away from her. I had become consumed with work, stress, being the provider. Somewhere along the way, I'd forgotten how to be her partner. One night, after another long session, we sat in the car outside my brother's house. It was raining lightly, and the streetlights made the droplets on the windshield look like tiny stars. "I miss us," she said suddenly. Her voice was soft, almost childlike. I stared ahead, the wipers ticking quietly. "I don't know who we are anymore," I admitted. She looked at me then. "Neither do I. But I still love the man I married. I think he's still in there." I didn't say anything right away. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe I could still be that man. "I don't know how to trust you again," I finally said, "but I want to try." And that was the truth. I wasn't ready to forgive, not fully, but I wanted to reach for something, anything, for Sophie's sake, for mine. Eventually, I moved back into the house, slowly, a few nights a week. We told Sophie it was a test run. She didn't care what we called it. She just smiled and hugged me so tight I could barely breathe. We rebuilt things one routine at a time, cooking together, reading with Sophie before bed, sitting outside on the porch in the evenings, sipping tea, saying little but being near each other. Then came the moment I didn't expect. I was in the kitchen doing the dishes when Emily came up behind me and wrapped her arms around my waist. Just held me. No words. Just warmth, familiar, vulnerable. I froze, not out of discomfort, but because I hadn't realized how much I missed that. "I'm still here," she whispered into my back. And somehow, those 3 words carried more weight than all the apologies in the world. Emily's touch that night stayed with me, not just on my skin, but in my chest. It was the first time in months that I felt something close to belonging. But it was also terrifying. Because now that we were rebuilding, I had something to lose again. We didn't talk about Daniel anymore. It was an unspoken agreement, a silent boundary we tiptoed around. But he lingered in my mind like a shadow. Some nights I'd wake up and wonder if she still thought about him, if some part of her missed him, or if what they had was simply a symptom of something deeper, something broken between us that had gone untreated for too long. I tried not to ask. I didn't want to know, and yet I did. One evening after Sophie went to bed, we sat on the back porch. The cicadas were loud, the air thick with July heat. Emily handed me a glass of wine, and we sat in silence for a while. Then, without warning, she said, "Do you want to ask me about him?" I looked over, startled. "I think about it all the time," she said. "How you must be wondering what I felt, what I thought, what we did, and I don't want you to carry that in silence." I hesitated. Part of me wanted to keep pretending, to let time do the erasing, but another part, the part that needed real healing, knew I couldn't move forward while avoiding the truth. So I asked, "Did you love him?" She was quiet for a long time. Then, "No. I think I loved who I was when I was with him. He saw me. He listened. But it wasn't real. It wasn't this." She looked at me then, her eyes raw. "It wasn't you." The honesty hurt, but it also relieved me, because for once I didn't feel like I was being lied to. I felt like she was opening a wound on purpose, letting it breathe. "I was so angry," I said, my voice low. "Not just at you, at myself, for not seeing it, for not being enough." She reached across the table and took my hand. "You were always enough," she said. "I was just too lost to see it." I nodded slowly, letting her words sink in. It wasn't forgiveness yet, but it was something close. Later that night, as we turned off the lights and walked upstairs together, not as husband and wife yet, but as 2 people slowly relearning each other, I felt a strange peace settle in. There would still be hard days, but maybe we were strong enough to face them, together. I started noticing little things, how Emily began humming while making coffee in the morning, the same way she used to when we first moved into the house. How she started leaving handwritten notes in Sophie's lunchbox again, and once even slipped one into my jacket pocket. "Thank you for not giving up on us." I carried that note for days, reading it like scripture when doubt crept in. But healing isn't linear. Some nights I still lay awake, staring at the ceiling, haunted by the image of her and Daniel. Sometimes it struck without warning. A smell, a phrase, a song that reminded me of those fractured weeks when I thought everything was lost. But I didn't lash out. I didn't retreat. I wrote in a journal, I prayed. And once I drove alone to the coast and just stood at the edge of the ocean, letting the wind hit my face like absolution. One evening, we invited my brother Ryan over for dinner. It was his first time seeing us together again under one roof. I saw the curiosity in his eyes, the cautious relief. After Sophie went to bed, he pulled me aside in the kitchen. "You okay?" he asked quietly. I nodded. "Getting there." He looked at me for a long moment. I know it's none of my business, but I'm proud of you, man. Most people would have walked away. I didn't answer right away. There were days I wanted to, I admitted. Still have some. He smiled, half sad. Yeah, that makes sense. As I washed dishes that night, Emily came up behind me, the way she had before, and rested her head against my back. I meant what I said, she whispered. I'm still here. Every day. And it hit me then. This wasn't about forgetting the betrayal. It was about choosing over and over to love someone in spite of what they've done, not because they deserve it, but because love, real love, isn't just a feeling, it's a decision. A few nights later, I caught Sophie standing at our bedroom door just before bedtime. Are you sleeping here again? She asked. I nodded. Yeah, I think I am. She smiled so big, I thought her face might crack. Then she whispered, Good. I prayed for that. It's hard to describe the feeling in that moment. It wasn't joy, it wasn't relief, it was something quieter, like a wound that had finally stopped bleeding. Summer bled into fall, and the days grew shorter. But inside our home, something unfamiliar had begun to bloom. Not the same love we once had, but something new, wiser, more fragile, more intentional. We had family dinners again. Sophie would tell us about her day, using her hands to animate every story. Emily and I listened, really listened, and sometimes we'd look at each other across the table and share a small smile. Those smiles carried more meaning than words. They said, we're still trying, but healing has its triggers. One afternoon, while folding laundry, I found an old envelope tucked in the back of Emily's closet. It had no label, just a small, white card inside. I recognized the handwriting immediately. It was Daniel's. You made me feel alive again. I hope he sees what he still has before it's too late. I sat on the edge of our bed, staring at the note, my hands trembling. Everything I'd worked so hard to rebuild felt like it was unraveling. That old anger, the betrayal, the humiliation, it flooded back in a rush. I thought we'd cleared all the landmines, but here was another buried deep. When Emily came upstairs and saw me holding it, she froze. I forgot that was even there, she said quietly. I'm sorry. Why did you keep it? I asked. My voice wasn't loud, but it was sharp. I didn't keep it, she said, stepping closer. I just never threw it out. I wasn't hiding it, I swear. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to believe her. Part of me didn't care. All I knew was that the ache had returned, as fresh as if it had just happened yesterday. I thought we were done with this, I said. I thought we were too, she replied, her eyes glossy with tears. But we're human. We don't heal in straight lines. She reached for my hand. You can hate me again if you need to. But I'm still here, and I still want us. I sat there, breathing hard, staring at the wall. My instinct was to run, to go back to Ryan's, to slam the door on all of it. But I didn't. Instead, I stood up, walked past her, and went outside. I sat on the back steps, staring out into the dark yard. I let the silence hold me. I let the disappointment settle. And after a long time, Emily came out too. She didn't say anything, just sat beside me, not touching, not pushing. We stayed like that, in silence, until the sky began to fade from black to gray. I didn't forgive her that night, but I didn't leave either. I woke up the next morning still angry, but it was different now. Not the wild, burning anger of betrayal, but a quieter kind. The kind that came from reopening a scar that hadn't fully healed. I didn't bring up the letter again. Neither did Emily. Not because we were ignoring it, but because we both knew it wasn't about the letter. It was about everything it represented, the parts of us that still hurt, the doubts we hadn't fully silenced. Later that week, during therapy, I finally told Karen about it. I felt foolish, I said. Like I had let myself believe we were further along than we really were. Karen nodded slowly. Progress isn't about avoiding pain. It's about learning how to sit with it and still choose each other anyway. That stayed with me. Emily, for her part, didn't try to explain the letter away. She didn't make excuses or promises. She just kept showing up. She cooked dinner. She checked in with me. She offered space when I needed it and presence when I didn't. One evening, as we cleaned up the kitchen after Sophie had gone to bed, she asked, "Do you still love me?" I didn't answer right away. I dried a plate, set it down, then turned to face her. "I don't know what kind of love it is right now," I said, "but it's still there. That has to mean something." Tears welled in her eyes. She nodded, then whispered, "It means everything." After that night, things shifted again. Not dramatically, but enough to notice. We didn't act like a couple trying to erase the past. We acted like people learning to carry it differently. Then, a few days later, Emily did something I wasn't expecting. She brought me a small box, placed it in my hands without a word. Inside were photos, printed ones, us in college, our wedding, Sophie as a baby, birthdays, road trips, moments frozen in joy. And at the very bottom, a letter, in her handwriting. I read it in our bedroom alone. It was a confession, but also a plea, a promise. Not that she'd never hurt me again, because she admitted she was human, flawed, but that she would never again run from the pain between us, that she would stay in it, work through it, with me. And something inside me cracked open. I cried, not just for what we'd lost, but for what we still had. Later that night, I crawled into bed beside her, pulled her close, and whispered, "I think I still love you too." It wasn't a resolution, but it was real. Fall gave way to winter, and with it came a softness neither of us had expected. Not a return to what we once were, but a new rhythm, slower, quieter, more honest. We still went to therapy. We still had hard days, but they no longer felt like threats. They felt like growing pains. On Sophie's 11th birthday, we threw a small party, just a few friends, pizza, a homemade cake shaped like a piano. I watched Emily laugh with the other mums, watched Sophie run around in the yard, and I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. Later that night, after the last dish had been washed and Sophie was tucked in, Emily and I sat on the couch. She leaned her head on my shoulder, and I let it stay there. "I didn't think we'd get here," she whispered. "Me neither," I said honestly. She lifted her head and looked at me. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "If you had the chance to go back, before any of this happened, would you?" It was a cruel question in some ways, but I knew she wasn't trying to trap me. She was trying to understand. I thought about it for a long moment. "No," I finally said. Not because I liked what happened, but because I think we were headed towards something worse if we hadn't hit this wall. We were drifting and pretending it was normal. At least now we see each other. She nodded, her eyes filled with something that looked like gratitude, maybe even awe. That night, for the first time since everything fell apart, we made love. It wasn't frantic or desperate. It wasn't about forgetting. It was about remembering who we were, who we still were, even under the weight of grief and time. It felt like a new beginning, one we hadn't dared hope for. In the days that followed, something shifted. We started talking about the future again, not just bills or schedules, but dreams, trips we wanted to take, things we wanted to teach Sophie, how we wanted to be more present, more intentional. There were still triggers, still moments when a silence felt a little too long or a glance felt too weighted, but we didn't run from those anymore. We faced them together. And then one evening after dinner, Sophie looked up and said, "You guys seem happy again." Emily and I looked at each other and smiled. "We're trying," I said, "and that's the best kind of happy there is." Christmas came with its usual chaos, wrapping paper, cinnamon smells, and the faint sound of carols on the radio. But this time, the season held something else too. Gentleness, a kind of quiet reverence in the way we moved around each other. Emily gave me a gift I wasn't expecting. It was a small frame, simple wood. Inside, a handwritten message. "We broke, we bled, we stayed." 3 sentences. That was it. But it hit me harder than anything else I unwrapped that morning. I didn't say anything, just took her hand and kissed her knuckles, holding back tears. I gave her a journal. Inside I had written, "For the days we still have to get through, Together. She opened it slowly, ran her fingers over the first page. Then she closed it and whispered, "Thank you for still choosing me." We didn't need to say more. As the snow began to fall that afternoon, Sophie pulled us both outside. We built a crooked snowman in the yard, laughing when its head rolled off for the third time. Emily made hot chocolate, and I watched her through the kitchen window. Her hair pulled back, cheeks flushed, sleeves rolled up. She looked like the woman I fell in love with, and somehow also like someone entirely new. Later that night, after Sophie was asleep, we sat in front of the fire. No TV, no distractions, just the quiet crackle of wood and the warmth between us. "I think I'm starting to forgive you," I said, my voice steady. She didn't respond right away. Her eyes filled slowly, and then she reached for my hand, gripping it tightly. "I never expected that," she whispered, "but I'll never stop being grateful for it." I nodded, swallowing hard. "I don't think forgiveness is a destination. I think it's something I have to choose again and again. I'll keep showing up for it," she said, "every day." We didn't sleep in separate rooms anymore, but more importantly, we didn't hide anymore. Not from each other, not from the pain, and not from the possibility of healing. Sometimes at night I would wake up and just watch her sleep, her breathing slow, steady, a reminder that people can betray you and still be worth fighting for. That love can rot and still be revived, not as it was, but as something deeper, wiser, braver, not perfect, never perfect, but real. The new year came quietly. No big party, no confetti or champagne. Just the three of us on the couch, wrapped in blankets, counting down together while the ball dropped in Times Square. When the clock struck midnight, Emily turned to me and said, "Can I kiss you?" I didn't hesitate. It wasn't a fireworks kiss. It wasn't movie script passionate. It was simple, slow, certain, like two people finally standing in the same place again. That night, after Sophie had gone to bed, Emily and I sat at the kitchen table, writing down resolutions. Not the usual ones, not about weight loss or career goals, but deeper ones, emotional ones. Mine: stay present, listen more, let go of the need to fix everything. Hers: be honest, even when it's uncomfortable, especially then. We folded them up and taped them inside the pantry door. A strange little ritual, but one that somehow anchored us. A promise, not just to each other, but to ourselves. In therapy, Karen called it living in the aftermath. It sounded bleak, but it wasn't. It was just true. After something breaks, you don't go back to how things were. You build something entirely new from the rubble. And we were doing that. Sophie began asking more thoughtful questions, not just about us, but about love in general. "Did you and Mom always love each other?" she asked one afternoon while helping me put away groceries. "Yes," I said, "but love changes. Sometimes it gets quiet, sometimes it hides, but it's still there, if you look for it." She nodded like she understood, or like she wanted to. Then she said, "I'm glad you didn't give up." I smiled and kissed her forehead. "Me too, kiddo." Later that week, Emily found me in the backyard, tinkering with the old grill. She wrapped her arms around me from behind and rested her chin on my shoulder. "I had a dream last night," she said. "You and I were sitting on the porch, grey-haired, watching Sophie play with her own kids." I smiled, wiping my hands on a towel. "Sounds nice." She paused. "Do you think we'll make it that far?" I turned around to face her, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. "I think we already made it through the hardest part," I said. "Everything from here is just living." She exhaled, like she'd been holding her breath for years, and for the first time since everything fell apart, I let myself believe in us again. Spring came early that year. The snow melted faster than usual, leaving behind patches of green that hinted at something new: renewal, growth, not just in the world outside, but inside our home. Sophie had a recital again. Her fingers were steadier this time, her confidence brighter. As she played her final note and looked up from the piano, she scanned the room for us, and when her eyes landed on Emily and me sitting side by side, holding hands, She smiled in that shy, relieved way only a child who's known fear of loss can. After the recital, we walked back to the car. Emily slipped her arm into mine, something she hadn't done in years, not performative, not for show, just a quiet act of connection, of safety. In the weeks that followed, life felt steady, and that's what I had come to cherish more than anything. Not dramatic declarations or grand gestures, but the steady, fragile rebuild of trust. The small things that stacked up to something solid. There were still scars. Sometimes I'd catch a flicker of sadness in Emily's eyes, or I'd feel my chest tighten during a certain silence between us. But those scars didn't ache the same way anymore. They didn't bleed. They reminded me of what we'd been through, and what we refused to abandon. Forgiveness didn't arrive in a thunderclap. It came in whispered moments, in choices made over and over, even on days when love felt like labor. And I realized something profound. You don't forgive because the other person deserves it. You forgive because you do. Because carrying pain turns your heart into something hard and bitter. Because healing, true healing, asks us to risk again, to hope again, to love again. One Sunday morning, months after we'd started over, I woke up early and watched Emily sleep. Her face was calm, peaceful. I reached out and touched her hair, gently. She stirred, then opened her eyes. "You okay?" "Yeah," I said, my voice low. "I was just thinking how far we've come." She smiled. "We really have." I nodded. "I'm glad I stayed." "So am I," she whispered. We lay there in silence, not needing to say anything else. The world outside kept moving. Jobs, routines, chores. But inside our home, inside us, something had taken root. Something strong. Something that had survived the fire. If this story touched something deep inside you, if it reminded you of a moment when you had to forgive someone or couldn't, I want to hear from you. Leave a comment below. Tell me your story, your pain, your healing, or just say, "I understand." Sometimes, that's enough. Don't keep this to yourself. Share this video with someone who might need to hear it today. Someone carrying a silent wound, wondering if reconciliation is still possible. And if you believe in stories that heal, subscribe to the channel right now. We have more real, raw, and powerful stories coming, including the next one that's about to appear on your screen. Click on it. Watch it. Because maybe, just maybe, you'll see a part of your own story in theirs.